When it comes to data and digital acceleration, companies are facing significant challenges. We're here to help you tackle them. In today's episode of SAP BeLux Talks, we'll talk to Rick Vera. Rick, welcome.
Yeah, nice to be here.
Rick, you have a sales background, but what you know and do goes much broader than that. You give lectures in companies, but also, for example, at the London Business School.
Yeah.
And one of the topics you often talk about is customer centricity, but I'd like to start with an anecdote, because on my way to the studio, I asked someone which year it is, and apparently it's 2035. Like, what does the world outside look like?
I even took them to 2040 today, because in the car on my way here, I thought, why just 2035? Let's talk about 2040. You know why 2040? And then I'm going to answer your question. If people think about the financial crisis of 2008, it still feels like yesterday. But that's 16 years ago. So 2024 plus 16, and you end up in 2040. So whether it's 2035 or 2040, I think that I know that the world will look more or less like the world today. There will be a slight changes, like maybe we will have some autonomous driving cars in our streets, and maybe in a couple of cities there will be flying taxis, drone taxis. But our world will look the same on the surface. I think that the big changes will be underneath the surface. The way all that is run will be run by big data, AI, and autonomization. So the big changes will be in how we deal with the world, how we deal with each other, and how we deal with the things that look the same but are connected with us and with each other in a completely different way than today.
Can you give some examples of what will be different? Because I already have the feeling that the world is run on data, is run on AI. What will be different in 16 years?
That's also, it'll be more substantial. It'll be all over. That's what I did today as well. I say in 2040 we're going to live in the metaverse, and then you see the reactions of people. Yeah, Rick, come on, the metaverse, that's never going to happen. And then you give the definition of the metaverse, which is a space where we do quite a lot, or almost everything that we do in a digital way. And then you start asking questions to the audience. And then to all of the questions that you're asking, people act and interact with each other and with the outside world in a digital way. So to some extent, we already live in the metaverse. So yeah, you're absolutely right. But the depth of that, the intensity of that, the impact of that is only going to grow, and not grow in a linear way, but grow in an exponential way. Yeah.
And what might be the outcome? Do you have an example of what a company will look like in 2040?
Yeah, if you talk about companies, the biggest change I see will be how companies are organized. What you see is that, and we already see that today, is there is a blurring of industry lines. Industry lines are disappearing. Take the food industry. What's the difference between the food industry and the healthcare industry and the wearable industry and the agriculture industry in the end? Because they all are trying to serve the individual customer as hyper-personal and even as hyper-contextual as possible. And so they need to work together in a different way, not as, one is a supplier and one is a user of the supplier, but in an ecosystem. So you're going to see blurring of industry lines being, an industry is going to be replaced by ecosystems. You see that in automotive, you see that automotive becomes mobility, becomes smart cities, becomes mobility as a service. You see that in healthcare. You're going to see that in a lot of industries that are going to disappear as an industry and going to blur with other industries, and something new is going to come out of this soup. And I know it's going to be ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
And how will we get there? What evolutions are still necessary to get there?
I think it's going to happen anyway. It's inevitable. And it's already happening. The ecosystems are in the making. And there are already ecosystems out there. If you see and I'm going to do name dropping, and then when you do name dropping, you forget a couple of other companies that do the same. So when you talk about the ecosystem that KBC is building, that's an ecosystem. If you think about the ecosystem that, Bol, the marketplace of Bol is an ecosystem. So you see more and more ecosystems that are already there and ecosystems in the making. So it's inevitable. And I urge companies not to wait for it to happen. because once an ecosystem is up and running, it becomes very difficult to be part of an ecosystem. So you need to be there as close to the start of an ecosystem as possible.
Okay, and what technological changes do companies need to make to create those ecosystems?
You know, when we talk about ecosystems, there's people that say, yeah, but that's not new. And they're absolutely right. The notion ecosystems is not new. But in the past, it was very difficult to build ecosystems because we start to see that a necessity for ecosystems is big data, is a lot of data going around in the ecosystem, a lot of data that are being turned into insights, and to turn a lot of data into insights, you need AI. So you need AI to cope with a lot of data, and you need a lot of data to feed it to AI. So the time is right for the moment to create those ecosystems that we've been dreaming of or thinking about for a long time. But it was pretty impossible to do that. Now with the ease of going to the cloud, big data, AI, it's going to be way more easy to create that underlying platform that you need in every ecosystem. In the past, it was so difficult because somebody had to set up that platform, somebody had to run that platform, and the money is not on the platform. The money is on what you do with the platform. So that was a barrier for companies to build ecosystems. Now that platform becomes so much easier to build that platform. So I think it's a matter of years, and it's not too many years before we are going to make a choice between platform A and platform B, and no longer between company A and company B.
Do we have the data that we need to get to that future, the 2040 you mentioned?
I think that most companies do have quite a lot of data. They are, if they're not careful, drowning in a data lake. I think that the big question is no longer do we have enough data, but the big question becomes how do we process those data into insights, and what are we going to do with the insights? It's no longer what superpower do we have. You have the superpowers. The question becomes more and more, what are we going to do with the superpower? And that is a shift. The shift used to be, okay, we need to get the data and we need to develop the superpowers to cope with those data. The data are there, the superpowers are there. Now it's a matter of what are we going to do with the superpowers. So all of a sudden it shifts from technology to creativity.
Mm-hmm. So that's indeed one thing companies have to do. If we rewind back, we're back in 2024. What else do companies need to do to thrive in that future that you created or that you imagine?
For the moment, today, because that's my keynote all about, the future is not something that is going to happen. The future is something that we make happen. Use Back to the Future as an example, the movie. When you're in 1985, and that's the date of the movie, and people fly back into 1955, when they change something in 1955, they realize, and we all as spectators, we all realize that if they change something in 1955 and they fly back to 1985 will be different. Why is it then so difficult for people to realize that whatever we do today is influencing our 1985, which is 30 years from now? So you can do things to be ready for that future by, to some extent, creating that future. And it starts for me with mindset. I see too many companies that are either ignoring those new forces out there or even denying them or flying from them. They need to embrace them ASAP and then start to master them.
Mm-hmm. That's one thing?
Yeah. Start to be aware of where are all my data entry points. Do I have enough data entry points? What are we going to do with the data? And that's what's my goal? What is my dot on the horizon? Where do I want to be in 2040? Mm-hmm. And how am I going to use the data that I have to get there? How am I going to use the forces out there to get there? And do I have enough data to get there? And where can I collect more data than the data I have? And maybe that's in your company, but maybe that is in other companies. And then you need to partner up with those other companies. But partnering up with companies is no longer the old-fashioned way of partnering up. It's more, hey, how can we work together? How can we start being more open-minded about each other, start sharing data, and start building a network between us?
How do you find the right partner? What are things you have to look out for?
I've written a book, The Guide to the Ecosystem Economy, and there's two, what I love to call the boring chapters in my book, which is about the do's and don'ts of building an ecosystem. Because people think, oh, you build an ecosystem, and then we find out along the way how we have to build an ecosystem. And I can't disclose which companies, but I've involved with 2 companies in building an ecosystem. And we didn't have rules for the ecosystem when we started to build the ecosystem. And after a couple of months, we started to realize, we should have base rules for potential participants. Base rules is what's your goal, and do we have a common goal? The base rules is, do we have common values? Do we think alike? Do we look at the world in the same way? How open-minded are you? I'm open-minded, but are you open-minded? Because it needs to be two-way. And in an ecosystem, there are no winners and no losers. That's why I don't like the terminology, the orchestrator of the ecosystem, because an orchestrator of the ecosystem is the winner of the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. It needs to be the facilitator of the ecosystem. And the more the ecosystem, and again, that is something that we couldn't do in the past and that we can do today. It's about distributed authority, no longer centralized authority, but distributed authority. So then you touch upon, blockchain and crypto. Mm-hmm. Also something that is it's in our life already a long time, but people are still looking at it. And besides cryptocurrencies, what the heck are we going to do with that? I think that the answer again lies in creating value in the ecosystem, mm-hmm. and creating value in distributed authority. And you feel that we're at the verge of that, and that companies that embrace it will be ready when it happens. And it's going to happen, and it's going to happen because some companies take the lead, and some companies will absolutely fail to become part of that, and I fear for them.
Yeah. You like to use the Shihari model. Yeah. Can you explain what this is?
Yeah. It's easy, and I think if I look at my own career, if I look at what companies need to do, if I look at good disruptors of business, they all apply that principle. It starts with you learn the rules of the game. When I started in my own career, you learn the rules of a company, you learn the rules of an industry, because otherwise you can't move to the next level. And the next level is, okay, once you have the rules and once you're really good in following the rules, you either stick to the rules, but there's no fun in that, that's boring, or you start to think, okay, how can I break away from the rules? What can I do different? Especially when the universe is changing, you can break away from the rules. Or when, and that's what the ones and zero nerds have done, the guys in Silicon Valley that have caused digital disruption, they looked at an existing business and they thought, but now we have digital and it's like a superpower. And with that superpower, we can break the rules, we can change the rules. We're still doing the same. Look at taxi business, it's still bringing people from A to B. If you look at fintech, it's still banking business, but in a completely different way. All of a sudden, we have a superpower, so we can break the rules. And then you break away from the rules. And that's what I did in my own career as well. I was never good in being the shopkeeper. It was boring. I didn't like to keep the shop. I liked to rebuild the shop. That is, break away from the rules. How can we do things different? And I've been leading departments and businesses in a successful way by doing everything else than what the industry was doing. And then you either fail completely, or you create something, you create your own blue ocean. And then the last phase is exactly that. You create your very own blue ocean. You create something, you create a new universe. That's what the computer nerds have done. I call the world that we live in is revenge of the nerds. The nerds, they were never part of our strategy. I was running companies in the 90s. We had computer nerds somewhere in the basement. They were not part of the strategy. And then they took revenge. They created a completely new universe. They said, Darwin is wrong, man. Darwin said you have to adapt to the environment. You know what? We're going to change the environment. And that's what you do in that last phase. You change the environment, and then the others have to adapt to your environment. Mm-hmm. And that's... If you look at real successful companies, real successful leaders, they always start by following the rules, breaking the rules, and then creating a new universe.
So that's the 3 parts: she, ha, ri.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Rick, Vera, I'd like to thank you for your time, for your insights. It was really inspiring to be for a few moments in 2040. But now we'll have to get back to work here in 2024. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.